So today is Friday, October 4th, the fifth day of the first month, Tishrei. Actually, Tishrei is the seventh month of the year. And I promised a Rosh Hashanah message, so I'd like to share with you the ideas that I spoke about before the prayers began. And my imagination was captured by a news item that was published at the end of August. A very interesting story, very amusing, with, I believe, a deep lesson. And it's about an Asian lady who traveled to Iceland as a tourist, and she was part of a group. And they all went out sightseeing, and then she actually changed her clothes, came back to the bus. People didn't recognize that it was the same person. They made a body count and they said, oh, this lady's missing. And they waited. And of course, she didn't come back because she couldn't come back because she was already there. And they finally decided they need to contact the police. Meanwhile, this lady's also hearing, oh, somebody's missing. There's a missing person. Then they asked for volunteers for a search team. Now, this lady actually volunteered to be on the search team. Everyone that was on the search team got a description. Asian, 5'3", speaks good English. And she's searching and searching, and finally, somehow, the penny drops that it's really her that is the subject of the search. And she tells the organizer right away, the search is called off, the police are called off. And that is that. Now, of course, they would never have found her, and she would never have found the missing lady if she would not know that it's her, because she can't find someone who's not really missing. It was only a recognition that the person that she's looking for is herself that enabled her to close that circle and basically realize that, first of all, she found herself. Second of all, she didn't need to find herself because she was never gone. Let me change tack for a moment. In the emissaries of Chabad, we have a kind of a forum where we post things together. I don't know, certainly hundreds, maybe 1,000 participants, where we ask for advice and we share different experiences that we have. So one rabbi wrote in a letter that he got from one of his people who he had invited to celebrate Rosh Hashanah together with them, to come to the services. The person writes back more or less the following, beginning with a rhetorical question. Join you for the holidays? He says, Rabbi, there would be no point for me to participate in any kind of religious observance. I have zero connection with whatever or whomever is up there. I've literally never consciously prayed to any divine entity in my whole life. And that means, Rabbi, you pray more times in one day than I've prayed in all 64 years of my life. And if there's any point in me reaching out or praying to a divine being, I'm not aware of it, but thanks for the invitation. And the question that I put to the congregation when I spoke Sunday evening was, how many of you feel like this? It's not an unusual feeling, and there's nothing wrong with it. And actually, there's nothing remarkable about it, because a feeling of connection to God is like anything else. If we don't know anything about what that concept means, then there's really nothing for us to feel. It's not something visible, so it's not something apparently empirical, and so on. On the other hand, that's something which is, in a sense, from a spiritual point of view, a lacking. And what is the answer to this question of this person? What do we tell them? Try to prove to them that there's a God? Do we try to bring different demonstrations of a divine supreme being? Do we say, hey, what's wrong with you? Why don't you feel this? You're not sensitive. Well, whatever we're going to bring to his attention is going to be something which he can have a different perspective, because it's something outside of his world. This is not what the Torah tells us to do. And to bring together these two different stories, the news item about the lady looking for herself and the frustrations of the man who says he has no connection to a divine being, and therefore there's no point in him praying, I want to tie together with a verse from the Parsha that we always read before Rosh Hashanah. We always read the Parsha called Nitzavim. And there's a very short passage. It says, the Torah, this thing, the Torah, it's not far from you. It's not distant from you that we would need to say, who will go to the heavens and bring it down to us? It's not far away across the sea that you would need to say, who will cross the sea and bring it back to us? And finally, the verse concludes, the thing is very close to you, in your mouth, in your heart, to do it. Actually, that very verse, some of you may know, is really the basis of an entire, very important book of Hasidic philosophy called the Tanya. And the author of the Tanya, in the opening, in the very first page, says this book is an explication of that verse, the verse that tells us it is very close to you, in your mouth, in your heart, to do it. And he uses a strange expression. He says it will be explained b'derech arucha u'ksara, which means in a long and short way. That's a Talmudic expression. It could simply mean that we'll try to explain it as simply as possible, but because it's a very involved concept, it might be a little bit long. But actually, the tradition of understanding the Tanya tells us that actually there are two ways, not only of explaining our closeness to God, but there are two paths of how we actually experience this closeness. Both have their place, but one is a function of our own effort and divine service, and therefore is more long-lasting and permanent. And the expression we find, by the way, the long and short way, in the Talmud, a certain Rabbi Yeshua says he comes to a crossroads, he's looking for the city, he finds a young boy, and he says, how do I get to the town? And the boy says, well, there's a long, short way and a short, long way. Just tell me the short way, the short, long way. And he gives him a path. The person very quickly moves straight on a very nice road. He can see the city not far, but he cannot get there because he is blocked from entering it by orchards and gardens. He goes back to the boy and he says, you told me this would be a short way. And the boy says, did I not tell you it would be a long way? Now tell me the long, short way. He gives him the other way, which takes much longer and it's more winding, but it eventually it's all the way he's able to enter the city and so on. How does this relate to the person's relationship to God? First of all, what is the short way? Why is it short, and why do we say in the verse that the Torah, which is God's commandments, and in general our relationship with God, is something very close? It doesn't seem to be very close. The reality is that it's very close because it's inside of us. The Jew has a soul, which is a divine soul, which in the words of the Tanya is a chelik elokat mima'al. It's actually a piece of God which is implanted with the individual. And therefore, the connection with God is not a connection with something outside of ourselves, it's actually a connection with something which is within ourselves. And this is where we come back to the lady in the search team. If we look for God, not realizing that God is within us, we can look and look. We will never discover God. We will discover a lot of interesting concepts. We'll learn what a divine creator is. We'll learn what omniscience is, omnipotence, and so on. But we'll never feel that connection. The connection is made possible because we have a soul which is connected to God, which is a spark of godliness. And that is the answer to that individual. And it is this realization that enables us to break through that barrier and feel that connection. Of course, then there's a long way. There's much studying to do to enable us to comprehend intellectually what that relationship is, what God is, what creation is, and so on. And that intellectual comprehension then trickles down into the emotional level, eventually expressing itself and inspiring our actions as well.